History is written by the victors, but what if the story of one of the most legendary conquerors of all time, Alexander the Great, has been misunderstood for centuries? What if his famous battle against King Porus of India wasn't a resounding victory, but instead a humbling moment, forcing him into a truce? Today we dive into the Battle of Hydaspes, where Alexander, the so-called invincible conqueror, faced one of his greatest challenges. Was this really the conquest of India, or have we been told a different story? In 326 BCE, after defeating the Persian Empire and marching through Central Asia, Alexander set his eyes on India. His conquest had earned him the title of a godlike figure in the West, but India was different. The vast subcontinent was filled with advanced civilizations, strong armies, and one king in particular, Porus, who ruled the region of Punjab. Before the battle with Porus, Alexander formed an alliance with Ambi, the king of Taxila, an ancient Indian city. Ambi was an enemy of Porus and welcomed Alexander as a means to settle his own scores. The Battle of Hydaspes took place near the Jhelum River, now in modern-day Pakistan. This was no ordinary battle. Alexander's troops, tired after years of warfare, were about to face a formidable Indian army led by Porus. The Indian forces had a terrifying weapon, war elephants. The Greeks were no strangers to battle, but they had never faced elephants before. These beasts were like ancient tanks, breaking enemy lines and striking fear into soldiers and horses alike. According to ancient Greek sources like Arrian and Plutarch, Alexander devised a strategy to cross the river at night during a storm, catching Porus off guard. But was this surprise enough to win the battle? The Greek historians like Arrian and Plutarch tell us that Alexander won the battle. Despite the elephants and the fierce resistance from Porus's soldiers, they claim that Alexander's superior tactics prevailed. According to Greek historian Arrian, the battle raged for hours, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. Alexander, seeing his troops falter, led a cavalry charge himself, hoping to turn the tide of the battle. But this was no ordinary battle. Porus himself entered the fray, riding atop an elephant towering over the battlefield. He was not just a king, he was a warrior, and his presence inspired his troops to fight even harder. The Greeks were pushed to their limits. It is said that Alexander during the battle fell from his horse and was nearly killed by Porus. Whether this is true or part of legend, it is clear that the Macedonians faced a challenge unlike anything they had encountered before. After the battle, Alexander supposedly asked Porus how he wished to be treated. Porus famously replied, "Like a king impressed by his bravery." Alexander not only spared his life but also restored his kingdom and even granted him more territories. But this story seems too perfect, doesn't it? Why would a conqueror who massacred cities in his previous campaign suddenly show mercy? Rather, it is considered inhumane in Indian subcontinent to kill an enemy who has surrendered. Not everyone buys into the traditional narrative. In fact, the Greek historian Strabo criticized many of the writings on Alexander's campaigns in India. He described them as full of exaggerations, calling many of the authors outright liars. Alternative interpretations suggest that Alexander did not win the battle decisively. Instead, it may have been a stalemate or even a situation where Porus forced Alexander into a negotiated truce. Porus, knowing his kingdom would suffer from continued fighting, struck a deal with Alexander I that allowed both sides to save face. Let's reconsider the Battle of Hydaspes from another angle. Alternative historians argue that Alexander did not win in the decisive manner claimed by the Greeks. They suggest the battle was far more even, if not a defeat for Alexander. Marshal Gregory Zhukov, a respected Russian military historian, noted that Alexander's army was severely mauled. The sheer size of the Indian army and the ferocity of the elephants took a heavy toll on the Macedonian forces. In fact, the only major celebration mentioned in Greek texts after a battle was this one, which indicates just how relieved Alexander's army must have been to survive. Alexander's army did not indulge in celebrations after the Battle of Gaugamela, where they defeated 200,000 Persians. No wild festivities were announced after the Battle of Issus, where they defeated a mixed force of Persian cavalry and Greek mercenary. The fact they celebrated after the Battle of Hydaspes suggests they considered themselves extremely lucky to survive after the clash with the Porus army with its elephant corps. So if the battle was so hard fought, why would Alexander suddenly reward Porus? There's a theory that Alexander did not win decisively and instead negotiated a truce. The fact that Porus retained his kingdom and gained new lands suggests that he had more leverage than we've been led to believe. This is counterintuitive. Ambi had become Alexander's ally on the condition he would be given Porus' kingdom. So why reward the enemy whose army had just mauled the Macedonians? The only possible answer is at the Battle of Hydaspes, the Macedonians realized they were dealing with an enemy of uncommon valor. Sensing defeat, they called for a truce, which Porus accepted. The Indian king struck a bargain in return for Ambi's territories, which would secure his frontiers. Porus would assist the Macedonians in leaving India safely. Alexander may have realized that further fighting would decimate his already weakened army. Thus, it was in his best interest to strike a deal. Porus, on the other hand, secured his territory and ensured Alexander's safe exit from India. The combat with Porus took the edge off the Macedonians' courage, and stayed their further progress into India for having found it hard enough to defeat an enemy who brought but 20,000 foot and 2,000 horse into the field. They thought they had reason to oppose Alexander's design of leading them on to pass the Ganges, on the further side of which was covered with multitudes of enemies indeed. On the other side of the Ganges was the mighty kingdom of Magad, ruled by the ferocious and wily Nandas, who commanded one of the largest standing armies in the world. According to Plutarch, the courage of the Greeks evaporated when they came to know that the Nandas were awaiting them with 200,000 infantry, 80,000 cavalry, 8,000 war chariots, and 6,000 fighting elephants. Undoubtedly, the Greeks would have walked into a slaughterhouse. Still 400 km from the Ganges, the Indian heartland, Alexander ordered a retreat to great jubilation among his soldiers. The celebrations were premature. This marks a turning point in Alexander's campaign. He never fully conquered India, and shortly after, his empire began to fragment. The battle with Porus may have been the beginning of the end for his legendary conquests. It's worth noting that Seleucus Nicator, one of Alexander's generals, later attempted to invade India again after Alexander's death but was defeated by Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of the Maurya Empire. This defeat further underscores how difficult it was for even the mightiest of Western powers to conquer India. So was Alexander's encounter with Porus truly a victory, or have we been misled by centuries of one-sided storytelling? History, as they say, is often written by the victors, but as we re-examine ancient texts and explore alternative accounts, the story of the Battle of Hydaspes may need a rewrite. Porus's strength, courage, and the fierce resistance of the Indian people challenged the greatest conqueror the world had ever seen. And while history books might tell us Alexander won, the real story may be much more complex. Thank you for joining us as we delved into the truth behind the Battle of Hydaspes. What do you think? Was Alexander the victor, or was this one battle where he met his match? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more historical mysteries. Until next time.